Okay, well, let's get to it. Mr. Seth Terkper is the former Minister for Finance, and he's got a theory about why government insists that we're turning a corner, things are looking up, macroeconomic indicators are improving, why that is the case. And his theory, well, it might surprise or even worry some of us. So before we get into the actual theory, I know you've been listening to our show all morning, and I know that you
every morning.
Yeah. Oh, yes, indeed, you do. And you are one of you were one of the first people to actually voice a view on free SHS when it was introduced in 2017. When it started in September 2017, you were one of the first people to say something about it. You actually said at the time that you didn't think it was sustainable.
Indeed, and my view that unfettered free SHS was not sustainable did not start from 2017. It was a debate we had, and I, whilst we were in government, was a firm supporter of the e-school project which takes the schools. You've lived outside, many of us go outside. Tell me which advanced country has free secondary education, boarding, all fees, everything paid.
I know of none.
Public schools, they are all day. US, everywhere, they are day. So secondary education is free. Some that counties put in and resources. But I've not seen the old style, modernization where government takes on all the responsibility. It is enormous. And when you have handled the budget before, as I've had the privilege to do, both when I was working public policy in Ministry of Finance before I went to the, to the fund, and as IMF, came back as deputy, I didn't see how the numbers I see, could, accommodate unfettered, and my emphasis, unfettered free SHS. And so, and to come home, look, education takes the largest, even before free SHS, of our budgetary resources, followed by health. Like advanced countries where defense is up there, So, you look at the numbers and it was just not possible to do unfettered free SHS, where everything will be paid for.
Is there a way out, though? At this point, is it possible? Is it even feasible for a government, whether this one or the next, to deboardinize people and, continue to provide free secondary school education, but just not pay for the boarding component?
Well, we have the legacy of boarding, and let's also face it. Some of the best schools in the country are boarding. So merit. So you make room. Like enhance the scholarship policy. Maybe you may want to phase it out in the long term, but the reality is that we have that legacy, right? And we have all been, to boarding. I didn't go to secondary school through, whole technical through, I don't want to say secondary just to make it factual. I was in a boarding house, right? Of course, my grandparents, parents were cocoa farmers. The way we scraped through was I got a cocoa board scholarship. So I'm saying that on a merit basis, the kids who do well, from scholarship secretariat to cocoa board to whatever, let's give them the opportunity to compete on merit, right? Whilst, and there are day schools which are very, there are schools which have a day stream, and I say very good, right? So, but taking the school to the community and improving resources like teachers pay, more teachers trained, and enhancing the curriculum, and I think that's for me is the way forward.
Right.
And I've always been, passionate about that we cannot do unfettered free SHS.
So let me just get you clearly. You're saying that going forward, you think that we may have to reconsider, paying for boarding students and probably just focused on the day students?
Well, we're not paying for boarding.
Well, I mean, when
as
it comes
parents and as students, you paid for boarding. It wasn't free.
Yes.
Right? And I'm saying that for those who couldn't, either you have the deferral, 2-3 installments, so you when there's a midterm break, that's when students go home. When they are coming back, they bring the second installment. We had various mechanisms that accommodated, of course, including borrowing by our parents. And I'm saying boarding is a legacy. It is still there, right? Scholarships and others came in on merit, right? Of course. So I'm saying that we can refine, but when you want to expand secondary education, even the advanced countries do it through a day school system, of course, with busing, with a few, of those things. So that's why I am a firm believer that the e-school option, is. And of course, going forward, of course, I don't want to sound too political, but my flag bearer has already said that he would open a conversation, free SHS.
So if he asked your advice, you would advise him, yes, free SHS, but don't pay for boarding. That's what you would advise your flag bearer.
That's where the e-school policy was coming from. But qualified.
Right.
Don't pay, but, qualify it because it's a legacy, right? Otherwise, you would deny some students. The poor kid who, through hard work and whatever, qualifies for Achimota, coming from a distance, and you can deny them. Right. I mean, that's for certain.
Right.
Right. And then when it gets to tertiary, the loan policy would have to be, enhanced.
Okay.
Yes, for all tertiary institutions. And the policy towards tertiary institutions, institutions that were deemed to be, like the teacher training schools and the rest, which had become tertiary. Remember, we got a flag for that as well. It's just not possible to pay, and most of them are also boarding. But so long as we had accepted that all tertiary, there should be some element of borrowing, both rich and poor. I think we should look at how we can improve those things, rather than introducing these things that's a heavy weight on the budget.
Okay. All right. If you just joined us, we're having a conversation with Seth Terkper. He used to be the finance minister. He used to run the economy of Ghana. And today, he is sharing, some theory that he has about the way the government is reporting the state of our economy today. So let's get straight into it.
But could you just sorry to take you, just a quick one. I don't think this view is exclusively mine as a minister, current or former. You remember, in 2018, I believe in CTFM, Ken said he didn't see, why the government should be paying for his nieces and nephews.
Oh, you're talking about the free SHS. Yes, the
SHS.
finance minister himself.
Yes,
in 2018.
Yes. That so long as we started making allocations, and that year we were taking 2.2 billion. I remember the numbers very well. Ghana cedis of a bond we had gone to issue to support free SHS.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
Sorry to take you back.
That's all right. So now we can get into the reporting of the state of our economy. So, I mean, is it your contention that the government is misleading us by not properly reporting, especially to capture the effect of all of the debts that we've deferred?
Misleading is a strong word. The point I'm making is that there are methodologies in fiscal management, as in, any business endeavor. So, Joy FM cannot compare itself to, the shops, some of the shops that are here. You have a standard, not just in communication, But I believe when I go to your accounts department, you have a standard where you know instantly what bills we have to pay, you know instantly what you have to do and all that. Ghana was a developing country. This is where I'm coming from. I happen to have been a minister. And when you become a middle income country, it's a formal process. That's why the World Bank and African Development Bank gives you a letter that you can no longer, you can no longer borrow at transition at extreme concessional terms. And so you gradually, so instead of borrowing for 40 years, with 10-year moratorium, 30-year repayment for the dam, buoy and other things from the World Bank, it begins to tighten. You can now borrow for only 25 years, 5 of which is moratorium. And then development partners come and tell you, sorry, you cannot, be getting all the aid because you become a middle income country. That is a classification. It's a thing. And with rebasing, with oil, with services sector, and now even in our severest condition, with defaults and everything, we have not been out of the middle income, lower middle income, brackets. The point I'm making is that we were doing things in a certain way as a low income country. What makes you a true middle income country is to improve your standards. And so let's come to the point I'm making. The primary balance is in every budget. It's just in my budget. So I'm not saying that we did not mention the primary balance as fiscal anchor. That has been the nation's fiscal anchor.
Now, walk us through, because you've introduced the term primary balance.
Yes.
So for those of us who are not accountants, break it down for us. What exactly is the primary balance?
Okay. Your deficit is your total expenditure minus your total revenue. So let's take a household. Salary, 100. Right. Expenditure, 120. Deficit, 20.
Yeah.
Why is it 20? Because your bank gives you a salary advance, your bank gives you, right. Then somebody comes and says that the definition of your deficit, which is 30, can actually be smoother, can be, there's another way of also looking at it. And it is that since borrowing is not a regular feature and something which you do, why don't you take the interest of 10, right? So your expenditure minus minus interest, 130 becomes 120 or 125. Your deficit then becomes 120 minus 100, from 30 to 20. But you know very well that you have to pay the interest. Are you following my point? That's just take a household whose expenditure includes borrowing, right? And the revenue for the household is 100. The expenditure, total expenditure, including the
borrowing.
Interest, right? The interest is 130, of which, let's say, 5 is the interest. Now, when you take out that interest, your non-interest expenditure is 125, right? Your deficit, by taking out the interest, comes down from 30 to 25.
That's right.
Right. And I'm saying that if that decision is being taken because borrowing is transient and you want to look at your long-term ability to pay, right? Fair enough. Because maybe the bank is seeing that, you get a salary increase because it's driven by growth. Which in your family life is your salary increase because you are promoted. In the case of a nation, it is growth. So you can use that criteria, right, and say we've discovered oil. We have 3 oil fields. Maybe we'll get a 4th, we'll get a 5th. So maybe primary balance is good enough for certain decisions. But I'm saying under our current circumstances, right, we knew already, we knew as a nation before we went to the IMF program, compensation and interest was taking the whole of revenue. Right. Which means that we were not, even despite additional oil fields and all that, we were struggling. We didn't have enough, by way of to cover compensation and interest. So even when somebody looks crystal ball in the future and says Ghana has bright prospects, my point is let's be careful in accepting a measure that takes out interest. 1, because we've defaulted. 2, because our interest and debt, the principal, has been deferred. So in today's terms, right? So I'm saying yes, it is an international measure, but let us also be mindful and perhaps use the fiscal balance.
Okay.
And the fiscal balance takes your total expenditure and measuring your performance. It doesn't take out interest. Now, 2 quick points.
Forgive me, I just want to be sure that I've followed you so far. You're saying that currently the way government accounts for, the state of our economy,
the measure of performance.
Yes, the measure of our performance. They use the primary balance, which means that the interest is not.
Interest on your loans.
Yes, the interest on our loans is not featured in there.
Yes.
Now, what you're saying is that it might be better to use a measure that factors that interest in.
Which we do, which we use. And that's the fiscal balance.
Right.
And the fiscal balance adds the interest. It adds arrears. Right. So remember, primary balance excludes not just the interest, but excludes arrears. And we know.
But that will make our performance look not as good as it is right now, won't it?
Why would you want to dress your performance if it's so good? It means that you are dressing it. It's like, because as I said, it's like when we used to put bailout costs and energy costs in footnotes and thought we were doing well. We crashed.
But Honorable
Terkper, yes.
Is the usage of primary balance an accepted measure of how debt sustainable or otherwise that you are?
It's one of 3 measures, and even the primary balance, you can calculate the primary balance on a commitment or cash basis, where you add arrears to calculate your primary. We are using the commitment, which means that we are not even adding arrears. Okay, that's my point. Now, what is our fiscal framework? We have, as I said, we calculate the primary balance and we say it's the anchor. Every budget we say, but we pass the Public Financial Management Act. What we do is that we have a fiscal framework which measures revenue, expenditure, including interest, arrears. So the preference is we're moving towards fiscal balance. And part of the reason why arrears, okay, if you look at the fund program, how do they calculate arrears? It's there. They call it a technical memorandum. Money, that is bills not paid in the last 3 to 6 months. Right? So, what about the bills that have been lying down a year, 2 years ago? So, we as a nation were moving, not today, under POOFMAP and under GIFMIS, to begin to account for total arrears, right? And total arrears is, let's say, contracts awarded, part of which is completed but not paid. So that definition already leaves out even the pipeline of contracts, the work undone, which we were going to put in the medium term. So I'm saying Ghana was making that transition. First example, Public Financial Management Act, the criteria uses fiscal balance, all expenditure, including arrears. It was not quantified in the Public Financial Management Act. The Fiscal Responsibility Act, passed by the current government, right, which is an extract of that section of the Public Financial Management, quantifies it. That's where the 5% comes from. So if in your own law, if the primary balance were that solid in assessing performance, we would have quantified primary balance. We would have qualified fiscal balance. We quantified fiscal balance. And so when we talk about, BOG financing the deficit, up to say 5%, and when we talk about, therefore, our fiscal our balance, our deficit, let's say deficit, should be 5%. If you take the Fiscal Responsibility Act, it is not based on primary balance. It is based on fiscal balance. Right. Okay. So, but my point is, the second point I'm making.
Before we move to the second point, yes. So, for the Ghanaian listening to you right now, hearing you explain that, well, I mean, the government has used one measure, which is internationally accepted, but in your view, not the best measure. How does this affect the Ghanaian listening right now, who is being told that, oh, things are looking up, things are getting better, we're turning the corner? What does your theory, if you're right, what does that mean to him?
Even the IMF qualifies it. And in a graph that the IMF uses to show our performance.
And we'll share this graph on our social media later.
This is a review. This is the primary balance. The primary balance is saying that by the end of 2023, going to 2024, our primary balance will be positive. But the fund was careful to say, this is your fiscal balance. This is a negative territory. So you see, it's a negative territory. So your fiscal balance is larger. And by 2024, you are nowhere near. In fact, even by 2026, you are nowhere near turning positive. Of course, as I said, you would always have a budget overrun. So we would be meeting, that criteria of about, 4-5%, according to this, negative, which is acceptable. So that international criteria we're talking about measures both. What is good for us? What is good for us is that, one, we have a headache with interest. We have to think about how to pay interest. We have a headache with principal, which has been deferred, and therefore is not being reflected, here. So I'm saying that, yes, I'm not denying that there has been some improvement. But I'm saying that let's be careful, in accentuating this success, too much. Because by 2026, I was comparing the debt figures, you've deferred the debt. Your debt may look like it has gone down. That's what deferral means. 2026, 2027, when that debt is due for payment, Ghana's debt, will still remain around above 70%, according to the scenario. So if you look at somebody's, what is it? Can't get the right word. Somebody's largesse in, deferring the payment of your debt, and you take it, or the Ghanaian haircut, right? And you take it, and that's why, I express exception with the word, we've made savings. No, it's a sacrifice of Ghanaians, right? And we've done a haircut, we've defaulted, right? We have our debt deferred, and we are asking the commercial creditor, the last stage, to also defer part of the debt, and if possible, forgive. So far, we've not been forgiven on a HIPIC, because again, we are a middle income country, right? So I'm saying, let's look down the road. When that deferral ends, the current administration may be out, but at least those who are expecting, to take over the reign of government should know that it is a bullet waiting, for you, right?
Right.
From 2020, especially from 2026, 2027.
So what you're saying is that by focusing on the primary balance, what they are doing is they are shielding the fact that there is still a big debt to be paid by a future government, which they are doing nothing to reduce. So at some point,
well, they've got a dispensation to suspend.
yes,
with the interest and
they've
principal.
suspended it. So at
Yes.
some point, it will be due.
Of course,
Right.
yes.
And so what you're saying is that when that time comes, whichever government is in place then will suddenly be burdened with it. It will increase their debt stock.
Yes.
And it will send the position of the economy pretty much back to where it was when we had to go into
Or even worse.
IMF, or even worse.
Yes, and Kojo, you made a very good, explanation of what we are saying. So what it means is that, one, in assessing our performance, we probably need to do more, right? We need to do a little more so that, as the purpose of our IMF program is to help you get out of the hole. And it's always temporary. It's always fixed. Short term, 3 years. Maximum if you defer, you decide to push it 4 years. So within that 4 years, let's say, yes, things are rough. First year, 1.5 years, right? From 1.5 years, why don't we have a goal of saying that even though the debt is deferred, we'll run the economy efficiently and be putting money aside to meet some of those future commitments.
That would bear some resemblance to the sinking fund
Absolutely.
strategy
That was the purpose of the
you
yes.
made use of. All right, if you just joined us, we're talking to Seth Terkper. He thinks that things are not as rosy as they may be made to look. And let's be fair, nobody is saying that they are rosy, but he's saying that they might still not be as good as we are told they are.
So let's get back to it, Honorable Terkper. You've been talking about, using the primary balance, which sometimes, because of the situation we find ourselves. But even if you were to look at 2024, for instance, fiscal balance, we have a deficit, projected deficit, of 4.8% of GDP. That's not bad, is it?
Well, it's not bad. I mean, definitely. That's if we are able to achieve it, and that's a fiscal balance. And it's not bad, but even there I have some reservations, because
What are those reservations?
well, to calculate a fiscal balance, another item is arrears, and there's a publication. I don't know if it's still on the Ministry of Finance website, which was started in 2010. We called it back then the contract database. There's some different name. We didn't have control of our contracts. Ministry of Finance, the value of contracts awarded in the system. So we embarked on, making sure that all the ministries gave us a profile of the contracts they had. It shows the value of the contract sum, the revised contract sum. If there's a variation, it showed of the contract what is in progress and what is not in progress, not started, of the contract work in progress, what is certified as done and what is uncertified. As done, what is paid out of the certified and what is unpaid, right? By 2016, it had been fairly, enhanced to the point where we're going to use part of the outstanding to inform, and the contract itself to inform the medium term, right? What it meant is that if you have a road contract which is going to last the next 2-3 years, maybe we should put a moratorium on new award of new roads so you can finish, what you have from your budgetary allocation for the medium term. Now, back to your question. Today, from 13 billion back then, approximately, the contract values in the system is 77 billion, out of which I believe 53 billion or so, is work in progress and payments, and others have been done. I still think that the provision we are making for arrears is not adequate. And that is where your question comes in. I would like to see more of those arrears reflected. In fact, a chunk of it, about 37 billion or so, 32, if I'm not mistaken, has been, bundled and added to debt. That's the IPP debt and the rest. So that contract sum has reduced. Yes, still, even if you took 37 out of 77, it's still huge. So it's a provision for arrears, of what, 2 billion, 3 billion adequate? And that is because, remember the measure I told you, we are still using, instead of using that contract database, we are still using the arrears unpaid bills for the last 3 or 4 years.
So here you see the arrears
yes.
You see the arrears of
payables, yes.
The payables. So the arrears is 11.6 billion. If you were to add this to the 50 billion, the deficit becomes 61 billion. So that would take it above 5%.
Yes, but I'm saying that exactly. So if you were to as middle income countries do, they try to put this, crude calculations. Now we have a database, so it means that no one is saying immediately. When you do 2 things, you slow down the award of contracts. So you remember pipeline. Former president said we are going to stick to the pipeline. Slow it down, clean what is in the system, and then begin to exercise more control through the givers. That is your transition to true middle income country. Right. I wouldn't have a problem with the 4% if I'm assured, and that's what we're going to monitor, if I'm assured that the provision for arrears is adequate. Because remember, we have a history where part of those arrears were shown as footnotes on memorandum, and we're being told we're doing well. Not too long ago.
So in that case, you've talked about the primary balance, you've talked about the fiscal balance. Now you say if you have the assurance, then you wouldn't have a problem. Does that then tell you that we are on the right path based on these figures?
No, the fiscal framework we have now, right? If you take the Public Financial Management Act and the Fiscal Responsibility Act together, it gives a framework which will put Ghana on the right path. If you manage debt and you don't stop paying your debt, you see, Kojo, the issue is this: where do we want to be with our debt? Let's say that, because we don't want to starve ourselves too much, we want to be between 60-65%. That would enable us, be tolerated in the in the capital markets. It takes 2 steps. First, you have to bring your 90%, even if you say 80 to 65, right? And then aim to maintain 65, and if possible, be reducing it to 55. How do you do that? You cannot do that by just borrowing and not paying. When you talk about bilateral loan, we pay principal and interest. When we talk about multilateral loan, World Bank, IMF, we pay principal and interest. So normally we don't default on those. Where do we normally have the problem? 1, treasury bills. It's for 3 months, right? Treasury bills is for 3 months. At the end of 3 months, when you borrow, at the end of the 3 months, meanwhile every week you are issuing treasury bills. But let's say that at the end of 3 months, instead of paying down, you borrow to refinance. Or if I like it, I'm holding treasury bills, I tell my bank, roll over. In that case, government doesn't have a headache to pay. So we don't pay. You issue because you need the money, particularly now when it's only treasury bills. So you issue another treasury bill. You are issuing 2 types. You get your finance people to analyze it for you. You are issuing one to pay back debt, which because you can't pay from revenue, and you are adding on top. That's a rollover. And that's why we talk about rollover risk. It means that you are rolling over and adding, rolling and adding. We've taken that habit to bonds, 3-year bonds, 5-year bonds, domestic. Right? We are not making repayment. You will never maintain your 65% where you want to live comfortably, which means that you must also manage the market. And you must have a mechanism for repayment, which I believe, I read a book during the global financial crisis. This time is different. Because every government thinks, this time is different. I can do things. It's not different. Right? So, for a country that was, took its debt to HIPIC, and for a country that has now defaulted, right? 2014 for me was very informative. We sat back in 2014 And then with my staff, we did some calculation. We had strengthened the debt management unit. And we realized that if you issued a domestic bond in 2010 to clear single span, doing so, it was falling due 2013. If you issued a 5-year bond, right, in 2010, 2015, it was falling due. And unlike the multilateral and bilateral loan, we paid only interest. So we're deferring the principal. But the big one in 2014 was the 2007 bond, which was going to fall due in 2017. And we were to cough 750 million in addition to the domestic bonds and others. This is the story of the sinking fund. So we realized the Constitution provided for sinking fund. The Petroleum Revenue Management Act states that if the stabilization fund is growing, you can go to Parliament and cap it, but you must use it for only contingency fund and debt repayment. That's how we set up the sinking fund.
So
and
the idea,
true enough, we were able to use our own oil money, both NDC and NPP when they came in, to pay down 550 million of that 750 million for the first time from our own resources. Should we have continued? We didn't. We kept borrowing.
So the idea of the sinking fund, the reason why you employed it, was that your view is if you incur a debt, you must contribute to the payment of that debt rather than defer it for someone else to come in the future and have to pay it.
You may, even in your own period like we are experiencing now, not be able to go to the market again. It has not even gotten to the next generation. That's the reality of what I'm saying. That I'm saying that from 2017, with 3 oil fields, we kept borrowing, and instead of, it was oil. Instead of putting money in the sinking fund, we didn't put money in it to be paying down and whatever. In our generation, we have defaulted because we did not continue to make provision to pay down the debt.
Great. So still talking about, the trajectory. You're talking about the economy. You've made the point. You had issues with the primary balance. Now we've looked at the fiscal balance. We've looked at the deficits. We looked at it and projected, based on at the 2024 budget, 4.8%. That you say, well, you don't have a problem with it. So if these two measures point to something positive, I say positive because, we've talked about fiscal deficit of not more than 5%. And this is 4.8%. Then it means we're doing well.
I added a qualification. I said I'd like to see on a budget and media review basis how much provision we are making for arrears. If you are still pushing it in footnote, no, I know that you are not going to achieve that goal. And if we are only substituting our borrowing without market access, both the domestic market access for bonds and the domestic and the external market access, if what we are doing is substituting it with treasury bills and we keep rolling over and we are not making provision, we are only substituting the problem with treasury bills.
Okay. And
we don't have a repayment mechanism. So why should I have confidence in the fact that, because the IMF program says that our debt will come down to what? To even it 70%. Why should I have faith in it? You are not paying down your debt.
So in the absence of these, based on what you see now, you don't have a problem.
I don't have a problem. I'm saying that we are borrowing. We keep borrowing. And what you are doing is that you are substituting treasury bills at 30% plus. The rate may be going down.
It's actually gone down for the 9th time, consecutive time. Now it's going down.
It can
below 30%.
Below 30%. Remember, when we did the sinking fund and we did the World Bank money to do the refinancing, the rate for T-bills and others fell to 16%.
Yes.
Yes. And then it started climbing. So I'm saying, even at 20%, you are substituting, right, a short-term loan at 20% with even the harshest, sovereign bond that we issued at 10.2%.
We've been shut out of the capital market, international one. We're struggling to actually.
Who are you blaming? You stopped the sinking fund.
Yeah, but
you stopped the repayment.
So the question really is that looking forward, We know the problems we have. What other options are available to us?
There are hard options. Reduce expenditure. For example, when crude oil prices fell, even with the day schools that we're talking about, 2015, when we read the budget, crude oil prices fell. That's for the 2016 budget. Didn't we cut the number? Didn't President Mahama say that we are not going to do all the 200? We are not going to continue building 200. I think we came down to 120 or so. And then we even made a qualification that of that 120 will complete, I think about 50 or 60. And then with 10 fields Sankofa coming, and with the economy improving in 2017, if we had won, it was then that we would have gone back.
Let me ask you a question.
To build them. So what I'm saying is that, it takes policies. It takes, a certain, if you want to please and you want to continue, using numbers, fidgeting and others and showing that you are performing well, you crash eventually.
And talking about using numbers and showing that you're performing well, so we're told there's a lot of improvement. We've turned the corner. It means we're doing well. When you look at the Ghanaian economy today, do you see improvement in it?
I see improvement, obviously. I mean, I wouldn't deny. We are in a fund program. I remember we have a slew of, Kojo, I hope is the word. Yes. I listen to you in the morning, of arrears, which hasn't been paid and all that. And I'm saying that I happen to be privileged in a position where I can be monitoring all of these things. And I don't like what I see. So
what
yes,
do you see that you don't like?
Of course, you are not making provision to pay your debt. You are relying on only, it's not sustainable. Relying on only treasury bills to finance will crash. It's not sustainable.
All right. Well, I think you've really outlined your theory for our understanding. It's now time for our audience to chew on it and see how they also feel. But I want to say a big thank you to you for your time with us this morning. It's always enlightening to have Seth Terkper with us in the studio. Today was
always a pleasure to be in the studio.
Yes, former Minister of Finance, Mr. Seth Terkper.